Welcome to Confessions of a CEO, powered by RG. My name is Carl Swansbury, and I'm delighted today to have Michael Hall, CEO of EQS Group, on my podcast. Michael Hall is a really interesting individual in that he spent 10 years at Barclays Bank before choosing to then train to become a qualified accountant, which allowed him to move into the role of FD at a soft FM business in the Northeast, before more recently becoming CFO and now CEO of EQS Group, which is a leading equality, inclusion and diversity consultant business based in the Northeast, but delivering services and outcomes nationally. Very few CFOs make the move into a CEO seat. So I'm really looking forward to understanding today from Michael the decisions he's had to make, the hurdles he's had to overcome, and of course the challenges that he's had to grapple with to become CEO of EQS. Michael, first of all, just wanted to say a massive thanks for agreeing to join me today on my podcast. Obviously, as a really good friend, we spend a stack of time together, but actually never have we had the chance to spend 45 minutes together in this type of setting. So massive thanks in advance, Michael, for your time. I think from my perspective, I'd love to go right back to the beginning, so to speak, maybe for the benefit of our viewers. So could you just tell me a little bit more about, I guess, your education and fundamentally, what got you into wanting to pursue a career in business and banking?
Sure. So education, state school, council estate upbringing, went to a comprehensive school in East Durham, which was interesting, was reasonably academic, certainly not Einstein, but did okay. Went on to sixth form at Durham, pursued in my first year sport, just because I liked playing football, biology and maths. And actually maths, always found maths quite easy at secondary school, but A-level, huge step up, and I just wasn't interested in it. So after the first year, swapped out a full A-level in maths to do business and economics. Okay. So did that at A-level, and found that actually that was where I had probably the most natural capability. Biology, I didn't do particularly well in. Football, I was, or sport, didn't do particularly well either. I was actually useless at football, although I thought I was good for a while.
Everything is relative.
Indeed. And then really enjoyed business and economics, and then went on to do business at degree level. Went to Sunderland University, similar to Neil.
And why Sunderland University?
First, again, similar story to Neil. First in the family to go to university, didn't really want to move away from home, and locally it was kind of the only choice. Got very bored very fast.
Okay.
Having done business and economics at A-level, and then effectively going back to GCSE in your first level of degree level, so I just got bored, quite frankly. I was actually working, how I got into banking, which was where my career started. I was actually working at the Doxford Park call centre on an evening in customer service, just doing part-time work to kind of fund my student lifestyle. Was getting bored of uni, started looking around on the jobs boards, saw an ad for a small business manager, read it, thought, don't really understand that, but I'll go for the job anyway. Rocked up to the interview, didn't have a clue what I was doing, and they actually gave the two jobs. There were two roles, and they gave those two roles to someone else with more experience. So when I got the call, I was like, well, that's fair. He said, but actually we'd like to offer you a job anyway. So got offered a job working out of Wingrove.
Yes, indeed.
Branch. So that's how my banking career started.
And this was with Barclays,
This
of
was
course.
with Barclays,
Leave
yep.
Words of Doubt.
So I was small business manager, I think that's what it was called. Went to Wingrove. I then got sent down to Gateshead to be around more experienced people, I think. One of those was David Foreman, who still works at Barclays today, great mentor. He really looked out for me in many, many ways. And then kind of started just progressing through the ranks from there. So did that for about 18 months, then stepped into the corporate area of Barclays to do merchant services. So I was doing merchant service sales down as far as Leeds, across to the East Coast, up as far as Scotland, travelling around, selling alongside the corporate teams. Did that for a couple of years, and then there was a relationship manager role came up within the corporate team in Newcastle. They created 2 junior roles. There was myself and Matthew Elliott, who is still in the banking sector, works for Handelsbanken now. They created 2 junior roles because they recognised that I guess there was a lack of succession within those teams. Again, really, really fortunate. So Simon Lenny recruited me into the corporate team, very experienced banker, excellent leader, great people skills, very good technically. And then I was surrounded by a lot of really good experienced people, Brian Foreman, Tony Doughty, the Ian Stevensons of this world. So I was very fortunate to be surrounded by them at a very young age, really, and that's where I kind of cut my teeth.
And obviously you mentioned that you went to Sunderland University and you were bored because you were back in a classroom environment. How long did you manage to stick with university before you stepped out?
Just completed my first year.
Okay.
And then I thought, I got offered, when I got offered the job in the bank, actually, it was, I would probably finish my degree and then go there anyway.
Yeah.
And do that kind of job. So as far as I was concerned, I was accelerating my career by a couple of years. So I thought, why not just take it and work hard and try and work your way up, and that's what I did.
And was it a tough decision to sort of effectively leave university and pursue employment, given of course you spent a year working hard at your degree?
No, I was pretty bored. I didn't get the social side to university because I didn't move away from home. And then there was an opportunity to start earning what was there. I think it was £15,000 a year at the time, but quite reasonable.
Absolutely.
Reasonable sums of cash for a 19-year-old. So yeah, it wasn't a difficult decision, although I did get a bit of flack at home.
Well, did you?
I did.
And talk me through the flack at home.
Just first one, the family wanting to go to university, a lot of expectation, I think. That I was going to be the first person in the family to get a degree, and I didn't.
Okay. And obviously sometimes the expectation placed on us is greater than the expectations we have of ourselves. I mean, was that difficult, or actually did you just dismiss what people had expected and did you just do what was right for you?
I think I always knew my own mind, so I was doing it regardless.
Okay. But you were probably conscious of the expectations that people had placed on you?
Yes.
Okay, got it. And obviously you were with Barclays, the Blue Eagle, for years and years, right? So just talk me through the sort of last year of your career with Barclays and what it was that started to encourage you to think about obtaining a professional qualification in accounting and finance.
Yeah, so there were 2 things really. One was, well, 3 actually. So the first was, it was 2010. So the last year was the midst of the banking crisis. Learned more in that year than I did in the previous 9. But certainly saw how different a bank becomes during those times, and I was always very keen to help the clients that we were working with. So they were typically small business owners who'd worked very, very hard to build up businesses, and a lot of them didn't have the capability, and they didn't have an FD, they didn't have the capability in-house to think about how they were going to navigate that. So a lot of businesses suffered as a result of those decisions. So that was one thing. The second thing was, again, the naivety of being in boom times and being young. You kind of think you're more than a number. So up until that point, I'd been promoted every every 2 years. It was exciting. We were, you were learning all of the time. But actually, the bank started to make redundancies as well. My role was never at risk because I was young and cheap. So they were wanting actually us to do more of the work of more experienced people, but actually started looking around and thinking, actually, if I stay here, this could be me in 10, 20 years' time. And then where would I be? So that was another decision, and then another factor. The third factor was actually it was dead man's shoes.
Right.
So Simon Lenny had one of the top posts within the Northeast. I was 2 jobs away from that at 26. And there were stacks of people that were more experienced and better at the job than me. So it was always wanting to progress quite quickly, and whilst I did, I could sense that was going to slow down, and that was going to frustrate me. So decided to move on.
That makes sense, and I guess it would be fascinating, given what you said earlier about accounting.
Yep.
And given what you said about your, let's say, lack of natural ability in the area of mathematics, it would be fascinating to understand how you landed on doing an accountancy qualification as the right next step out of banking.
Sure. So I went and did some kind of freelance work for a while. Okay. I started consulting with clients, helping them with cash flow, helping them look at costs.
And this being clients that you banked at Barclays?
Some, and then just picked up through networking.
Right.
So started helping them with looking at the cash flow, looking at small-scale funding options, and then just getting more involved with their businesses. So at that point, I thought I really need to understand this more. And actually, so I thought, well, yeah, let's start studying towards an accountancy qualification. I thought, yeah, that's if I can get that qualification behind me, then I can have a career in finance. That's always going to be needed, and a qualification was an obvious route to go down. Actually, whilst it's hard, becoming chartered is very, very hard, and the maths and everything else that's behind it is, it can be quite challenging, especially when you're doing it on evenings and weekends out of textbooks. Whilst raising a young family, it was tough going, but it's back to that interest. So I was interested in it, and because I was interested in it, I was actually applying it, and that for me it just seemed to work.
Because you decided, didn't you, to do CIMA?
I did.
Again, what was the reason for CIMA versus the other accounting qualifications available?
I was never going to go into practice.
Okay, so you wanted an industry, business relevant accounting qualification?
Yes, so the tax, the compliance side, whilst necessary, didn't really float my boat, more understanding how a business works.
Okay, that makes total sense.
And so CIMA for me was as much of a business degree that I missed out on by leaving as it was an accountancy qualification.
Yeah, that
so
makes
I managed
total sense.
to get both at the same time.
Awesome, which is, as you say, quite incredible given you went back to education. Yep. You did this in your own time whilst, of course, bringing up 3 kids and having a full-time job. I mean, genuinely, how did you manage those demands on your time? Because there's only 24 hours in a day, and it sounds like you were probably using most of them. Yeah,
it was pretty full on. Just hard work.
And did you have to sacrifice?
Yeah, I did. So obviously I had to sacrifice evenings with the family, weekends with the kids. But ultimately it was all about making sure that we had a kind of solid and stable future. So I think everyone understood why we needed to do it.
Yeah, I think the word sacrifice is interesting, isn't it? Because sacrifice is a negative word, but actually it was more of an investment into your future, which I think is probably a more positive way of looking at the same. For sure. Okay, so obviously whilst you were doing CIMA, that's when you decided to actually get a job in finance as FD at Maxim Facilities Management. And of course, Maxim Facilities Management, as a northeast-based privately owned soft FM business, was a business that went through significant change on the back of having secured investment and having made acquisitions. What would you say was the sort of most notable achievement that you were able to enjoy whilst at Maxim, given that was your first full-time proper finance role?
Yeah, I think actually just doing the job as FD when I was actually qualifying to be an accountant.
Yep. It's almost learning on the job to some degree.
And running and changing the business. So we made 4 acquisitions over the space of 4 years. So we scaled it by 3x. But also that it was a family business. So the role was very hands-on. So you were involved in anything and everything. And actually we won. I was involved in looking at the customer care proposition and putting in some technology that kind of supported us doing that, and auditing clients and making sure that we were evidencing that we were providing a quality service and getting feedback from clients. And the business went on to win an award for customer service. So I think, balancing all of that and 4 acquisitions and scaling the business and qualifying as an accountant at the same time in my first role as FD, I think all of that together was looking back, you think, wow, that was a lot to take on.
Yes, absolutely. And you mentioned that Maxim was privately owned, and of course, many businesses in this region are privately owned. I mean, how truly difficult was it trying to grow and change and evolve a business that fundamentally was owned by one individual who probably wanted that change, but naturally there would have been times where there may have been conflict. I mean, how did you manage that?
I think through the skills I acquired at Barclays, actually in that relationship management role.
Okay, yeah.
So and that has stood me in good stead throughout my career, really, being able to, because ultimately it's about managing expectations of clients, managing expectations of the bank, managing the expectations of locally of management and leadership. So it was a stakeholder management role, really, and I just found myself applying those skills that I'd acquired during my time in the bank, because we had multiple stakeholders to manage. So we had an external investor, which the business hadn't had before. We had Graham as MD. We had some of his family members involved. We had people who'd been involved in the business before it had finance. So there was a lot of change, and then we were acquiring businesses at the same time. So there was a lot of change to bring about. Didn't always do it successfully, I might add, and made a lot of mistakes along the way. But you learn from your mistakes, and you just try to do it better the next time, and then you make a new mistake and keep iterating. So just trying to engage with the stakeholders who have a vested interest and try to understand their perspectives, I guess. And try to take them on the journey, although that's not always possible.
Yeah, and we'll come back to that, I think, in a short while, because I think one thing that anyone in business will come across often is how difficult it is to encourage people to see things they can't see.
Yes.
And of course, when buying and integrating businesses, that's so difficult to do, because hindsight is a wonderful thing, but it's really difficult to give people the benefit of your hindsight. So we'll maybe touch on that shortly. So obviously had a really interesting, challenging, rewarding period with Maxim as finance director, which was the role you were in when you left Maxim. What was the one catalyst which ultimately encouraged you to move on from Maxim and pursue your next opportunity? Well,
actually, again, a few different factors. So it was around the time we had Lily, so third child, worked very hard, got qualified. I was actually going to do interim work for a while. I felt I'd built up enough experience, and actually it was we'd made a lot of change within the business, and it was going to be very difficult with the structure that it was to continue to grow in the same kind of way.
And you said you were thinking about interim. Was that because what you were thinking about doing at that point was maybe continuing to support businesses, but from a financial and business strat perspective, but maybe not having a full-time demanding career so you could spend some time with Lily and the boys?
There was an element of that, but also I was kind of just at that. I'd done 4 years there, and it was kind of right. I wasn't quite sure what my next move was going to be.
Right. Okay.
And I wasn't quite sure what kind of business I wanted to work for. So we were just about to have Lily. So it was kind of just I was pretty confident that I built enough experience to go out and support businesses on an interim basis. I'm confident that I could replace the income that I had, and so I just wanted to take stock for a while. So that was the thinking, and I planned to do that for about a year, but that didn't last very long.
So how long were you taking stock for?
About 3 months.
So not very long. And what was it that distracted you then within that period to ultimately get you to join a business as a full-time FD?
Well, our friend Neil Stevenson happened to introduce me to Chris Quickfall.
And you knew Neil Stevenson at that point, how?
I didn't.
Okay, so just talk us through that, because of course networking business is so important, right?
Yes, so as I was starting the interim piece, I thought Neil was all over LinkedIn at the time. He'd not long sold Onyx and was starting to build up his profile as non-exec. He was very, very active. He was local. So I didn't know Neil, but I knew of Neil. And he put on LinkedIn, I don't think he might know this now, but he put on LinkedIn that he was going to be at an event. So I thought, he's a guy I need to get to know. I rocked up to that event with the objective of meeting Neil.
Very targeted.
Hung around until the end, like a bad smell for a while, and then got chatting to Neil, and we agreed to have a coffee. We met up a few days later for a coffee, and he said, "Oh well, actually, if you're in the interim game, I know one of the business that he advises there's a FC that's retiring, and the business is growing and scaling, and the founder is looking for a CFO, but he's looking for a CFO down in London because Chris had moved to London to scale his Cognisys business. So actually there's probably a 3-month gig here." And I thought, perfect, that's exactly what I set out to do. And then I met Chris.
And Chris being? Chris
Quickfall. So he was the founder of, well, he wasn't the founder of EQS, but he was the founder of a few businesses that operated in, that are now part of EQS. He was, looking to bring in, bring executives into the business. So he'd previously had senior leaders, but I think he was kind of really looking to bring executives into the business.
Right.
So he hired Andy Goff, who's now our MD, and Andy and I started on the same day.
Andy as CEO and you as CFO.
Andy as MD at the time, or GM. Chris was CEO at the time.
Yeah.
So Andy was brought in as GM. I was brought in as interim CFO. And it was always meant to be a 3-month gig, and I kind of, I was very clear that I was going to take stock for a year. I was very, very clear. You know that I was very clear on that. And then started working just in a kind of just a more, not that the Maxim business wasn't mature, but the board was starting to mature a bit more with bringing the likes of Neil in.
Yes, governance was clearly important for the business at that point.
Yes, so Neil wasn't chair at the time, he was non-exec, so they had a chair in Jim Chambers. Neil was non-exec. they had Chris, who was as CEO, Andy was being brought in, whereas previously the board meetings were pretty much me and Graham at Maxim. So
Yes.
it was a wider team, it was a bigger team with a wider executive skill set. I thought, actually, I'm learning a bit here. I'm learning more than a bit. I'm learning quite a lot from the different people that are around the table. I quite like this environment. But I was thinking I'll be here for 3 months. I'll learn what I need to learn, and then I'll be on my way, and I'll use the experience in future. And then after a month, Chris sat me down and said, I'm thinking about stopping the search for the CFO, and would you like the job? At which point I wasn't expecting it, but I didn't actually hesitate. I said, yeah, let's.
Or did you just say yes without even really having to spend much time reflecting?
Yeah, pretty much, because thought Chris was a smart guy, liked how he operated, really liked Andy, worked really, really well with Andy. Could see that the board were very, very experienced, and I thought, yeah, at this stage of my career, this is the environment I need to be in, around people with a varied skill set and a lot of experience.
So when were you formally appointed full-time CFO then?
Like a month later.
Okay.
So I think I started in the January, and by beginning of March, I was Group CFO.
And this was March
2018.
2018. Okay. So I guess let's now just sort of fast forward somewhat, because I'm sure from March 18 up until December 22, there were lots of challenges, lots of difficult discussions, and of course a lot of hard work. But fundamentally, of course, in December 2020, that is when I advised you and the management team on the MBO of the EQS business, the carve out of Cognisys, which of course Chris now still owns a controlling stake in, but is no longer part of the group. Of course, we brought in a significant amount of funding from Shard Credit Partners, and we completed the group's first acquisition. So the question I'd love to ask is, what do you think was the moment when you first really believed that there was an opportunity in the business for you and management to buy it? When did that first become real for you?
Pretty early on. I think it was pretty obvious. So, it was certainly obvious to me that if we could scale Cognisys, which at the time was very embryonic, we had probably 10 clients and a couple of 100,000 of revenue. That's a software business, so, so it was very clear to me that if that business did grow, and knowing Chris, it was very clear that those businesses were going to require a different management team, a different funding structure, a different funder entirely. So pretty early on, it was obvious to me that both businesses were going to go on a journey, and I thought that I could be part of one of those. So as Andy got his feet under the table and started running the business, Chris started to have less and less involvement in that. So it was within a year we were operating two businesses effectively.
Right, so two separate businesses ran largely by two separate management teams, save for you were CFO in both businesses.
Yeah, and Chris.
And Chris was common shareholder across the two. Yeah. Got it. So the MBO completed in December 2020. That's when you, Andy, and the management team bought the business. And of course, Shard Credit Partners provided a total funding availability of 20 million for the group. And of course, since that point, you've gone on to make many acquisitions. So there's two things I'd love to just spend some time talking about now. First of all, it would be good to know how you have benefited personally from the acquisitions the group has made. And I don't mean how EQS has benefited. I mean you as a CFO before you were appointed CEO.
So again, it's down to learning, I think. So all of the when we were acquiring at Maxim, it was no acquisition is simple, right? But the acquisitions were cookie cutter, effectively.
Right.
So they all did the same thing.
Yeah.
And we acquired those businesses and actually transferred staff, the management teams that, the cleaning staff that came with those businesses.
Yes, because most of those acquisitions were trade and asset
acquisitions, trade and asset
right?
acquisitions.
So, as you say, much more straightforward and lower risk than buying shares.
Yes, indeed, and the not only that, but the people transfer, and the people are used to transferring because of Tupi. So actually, those acquisitions can, in terms of complexity, can be relatively straightforward. And everything's relative, right? So as I say, no acquisition is straightforward, but they can be relatively simple. So all of the service remains the same, the staff remain the same, the area manager often even remains the same who's dealing with the client. Often the only thing that changes is who's sending the client a bill at the end of the month, and then clearly you put your own processes and procedures in place. But that should be an improvement given that the business has had more scale. So in terms of cutting your teeth in M&A, it's probably a good place to do it.
Good start point.
However, we then went to probably the most complex acquisition strategy that we could have embarked upon. So that has been a huge learning curve, because all of the businesses do different things. We're also in the diversity, equity and inclusion market, so they all they all have, they were small businesses that we were acquiring, so they all had an individualistic approach to how they were dealing with clients and different cultures that were operating within the business. So actually bringing all that together has been a huge undertaking, and a massive learning curve. So that's how I've benefited. Again, experience and learning.
Yes, and it's really difficult, isn't it, when you are an acquisitive business, because on one hand you want to acquire to create scale, you want to create efficiency, you want to try and harmonize the businesses, because that's the only way you can efficiently manage an enlarged group. But of course, when you are bringing together businesses that have totally different values and cultures and are servicing different clients in a different way, actually trying to create efficiencies can actually damage the value of the asset you've acquired. So it's so difficult, isn't it? And I think the point you've made is not one acquisition is the same as the next. And I think that's often where acquisitive businesses go wrong. They think that you can put transactions into boxes, and sadly, that is not necessarily the case.
The thing that we've been able to do is, and why we have been able to achieve it, is because fundamentally all of the businesses have the same purpose. So all of the staff within EQS are in some way, shape or form affected by, or their family members affected by, or are passionate about around inclusion, and that's the common goal that we've been able to ensure that everyone buys in and believes in what it is that we're trying to do, albeit there's a lot of education and challenges that we've had to experience along the way.
So just to maybe try and for a moment just reflect on how much change the group has gone through. I mean, since the MBO in December 2020, just reflect on how many acquisitions the group has made, Michael, and what the group now provides in terms of advisory services to end clients. So
we made 4 acquisitions in the space of 12 months, which was literally sucking from a fire hose. But we did it for very sound strategic reasons, and the business that we acquired as part of the MBO provides really specialist support in a really specialist market. So we had 3 businesses that were part of the MBO. So we have Invate, which is assistive technology that we're providing to the disabled students market. So effectively we have hardware and software to support students with their studies. So we buy in laptops, we add the hardware and software specification that's built specifically for the student, and we support the student with getting set up and training and wraparound care as well. And then we have a software product that we developed for that particular market as well. So the Achilles heel of the business when we acquired it was really great business, really committed to delivering a great service for the student. So we have, our star ratings are like 4.5 out of 5 consistently. Operates well financially, but was limited in terms of growth because there's only a certain size and scale you can grow to within that market. And fundamentally, we had the vast majority of our revenue was ultimately derived from one customer, and that being Student Finance England on behalf of Department for Education. So there were a few things that we wanted to address within the business. So we thought about, okay, how do we expand the reach of what we're doing, but also how do we utilise our expertise in neurodiversity and disability into a wider market to create more impact. And that's how we started forming our acquisition strategy.
And you mentioned the acquisition you made as part of the MBO,
Yes.
Amano Technologies.
Yep.
So what did that business allow you to offer that you couldn't offer prior to acquiring it?
Yes, so that business offers non-medical help, so one-to-one support for students with either a mental health issue, neurodiversity or a disability. And it can be anything from a note taker to a mental health coach and anything and everything in between. It did a couple of things for us. So one, it operates on a different framework, but it also sells directly to universities as well. So it operates within the DSA, so the Disabled Students Allowances for people that don't know, which is the market that Invate and EQL operate in. So it allowed us to utilise the infrastructure that we had within the business already from a sales and marketing perspective, from an operational perspective. So we could bring that business in to the group and manage it because we understood it.
Yes.
Relatively easily. As I said, everything's relative. It also gave us an opportunity to scale. So it was a business that predominantly operated within the southwest, had an excellent reputation for quality, but we knew we could take it further afield. So we'd scaled a business nationally in EQL, and we thought we could do the same with Amano, and we have. So it did a couple of things for us. It got us into a new market directly with higher education. It diversified our revenue streams, and it also added capability to our group.
Understand, and obviously you've gone on to make other acquisitions since you acquired Amano in December 2020. And if we had more time, we'd go into each in detail, but we'll certainly run short on time if we tried. So I think the one thing I'd love to just maybe ask is, obviously I and my team were advising you and the group on these acquisitions, so we were knee deep in the trenches with you 24/7 throughout each of the acquisitions. So we know what it required in terms of focus, resource, mental effort and capacity, etc. But the one thing that I could never have understood, because I'm not the CFO of the business, as you were then, was just how you were managing to juggle the day job and the acquisitions that you were making and the integration of the businesses you'd acquired. I mean, how were you sort of managing those urgent priorities, accepting all were urgent and all important?
Well, it took a bit of time. So we went really fast. So we acquired 4 businesses in the space of 12 months, and then we took stock. So we spent the last 12 months integrating. We were clearly doing the integration, but making sure that systems and processes were aligned, that actually our functions were. We scaled from about 40 staff to about 100 in 12 months. So clearly there's a lot of catching up we had to do with infrastructure. But we've now got some really great people in place. So we've appointed a head of people, Camilla Williams-Johnson, who's absolutely superb. We're aligning a lot of our systems now, and we've just done a lot of work with those businesses culturally to get them behind kind of one vision and one goal, and we're really getting there now with bringing those businesses together and setting our stall out for the next phase of growth, because there's still much more we need to do.
Sure. And obviously this podcast is Confessions of a CEO, so I think we now just need to spend a minute or so just understanding, how you've managed to evolve from CFO to CEO, because that is a leap that very few CFOs will ever make out of choice and out of ability. So just talk us through, Michael, how and why, you found yourself effectively shuffling seats around the board table into the CEO chair?
Well, it happened quite organically, really. So Andy and I have worked together for a very long time, and we always talked about that as a direction of travel anyway. There's an age gap between Andy and I, and there was always a kind of view that would happen at some point, and we talked about that quite openly. It happened quite organically, really. So I was doing a lot of work around strategy because of the M&A piece, and Andy was having to do a lot of the integration work, as he's way better at that than me. So it was more just a recognition of what was beginning to happen anyway. Andy was dealing more with the operational side of the business. I was focused a lot more on strategy, and we just sat down and said, well, look, it kind of makes sense for us to do this now, and it's worked really well.
So to any CFO who might be watching this podcast, what should they start doing consciously if their intention is to become a CEO?
I think you do it naturally in a small business, because we are still quite a small business. So you're involved in a lot of things, and I always was, just through the nature of interest, I guess, but also the size of business that we were in. So you're involved in a lot of operational decisions. When we were doing the MBO, clearly you had to come up with an M&A strategy. So just getting involved in, not just producing the numbers, being involved in those kind of conversations and applying your skills in areas way beyond finance, because you can't do that in an SME.
It's interesting because you've said that as if every FD just becomes strategically and proactively involved in all parts of the business, and of course not many FDs do, hence why many FDs will never become CEO. So I think the point you've made is really valid, which is, the reason you have just over time become the CEO is because you have been interested, you have been involved, and you have added value to all parts of the business. So it has just evolved, but you've probably proactively made it evolve?
No. So I think it actually stemmed from the background. So I didn't actually set out to go, one day I'm going to be CEO. It did happen organically.
Yes.
And it kind of got to the point where, as CFO, I'd done a fundraise, I'd done a demerger, I'd done a buyout, we're doing M&A. So I'd kind of done little bits of most things. So because I'd been exposed to that in the businesses that I was involved in, that kind of equipped me to then go on as CEO. But I've still got stacks to learn as CEO, don't get me wrong. And one thing I think we should talk about is actually the step up between CFO and CEO, because it is significant.
Let's cover that right now, please, if you don't mind. That's a really good point to get on to.
But I think just going back a step in terms of why I became involved in those things, I always said I learnt the job backwards. So because I started in banking, my job was to interpret numbers, not put them together.
Yep.
So I still approach analysing numbers in the same way.
Yes. Okay.
So it's what is this telling me, and I've been able to. So I think that's the bit that often FDs that want to become CFOs, that want to move on further, they struggle with is. I've learned how to put a balance sheet together. I've learned how to put P&L together. I know the debits and the credits.
Yeah.
So and I have seen this quite a lot over the years. Is we know how to put numbers together, but don't necessarily know how to interpret them or communicate them effectively with other people around the table. And that's the bit that you need to be able to do as a good FD and CFO. But that was the bit that came naturally to me because that was where I started. What actually became more challenging for me was debits and credits.
Yes, preparing the management accounts.
Yes, so actually that bit I always found quite easy, the operational nuts and bolts, but fortunately I was put in at the senior level and then had people who were more experienced than me doing the day-to-day accounting, if you like.
And just on that, how did it feel being CFO, knowing that you've got people that report to you who know more than you when it comes to producing, monthly management accounts? Yeah.
At the beginning, quite daunting, scary, but over time you learn enough, and once you're qualified, you've got the knowledge. But at the beginning, scary as hell. Over time you get to understand what you need to understand, and then as I say, the qualification fills in the bits for you. But certainly even now from an operational finance perspective, I wouldn't dream of saying, okay, well this is what we need to do from day to day to ensure that our finance team runs effectively and efficiency. That's not the type of CFO I ever was and ever would be. I leave that to people who have more experience and more skills.
No, the skill of a CEO is making sure you've got the right people in the right seats at the right time. So you're acknowledging that there are people who have more interest and more experience in the area of producing management accounts. So therefore you can interpret and make business decisions on the back of said management account. So that makes total sense. So obviously you're now CEO of EQS, which is fantastic. And I appreciate how that has been evolution over time. For you now as an individual, and this is not really in any way linked to EQS, but for you as a CEO, as a professional, what's your ambition next? Because you have achieved so much in such a short period. So what's next for Michael?
I think it's there's an awful lot to do in terms of inclusion in the world, and I think the market is changing. So the inclusion space over the last 10 years has been focused on different areas of inequality at various times. So clearly you had the gender pay gap and Me Too and all of those kind of things, and then there was the very unfortunate events of George Floyd, and then there was a lot of focus on race. There's a lot of focus around neurodiversity at the moment and neuroinclusion, and actually the clients have to go to a number of different places to get solutions. And what's understood within the industry and within the sector, but is not more widely understood, is well, first of all, social class is the biggest determining factor of outcomes. But you have the compound effect of intersectionality. So If you are from a working class family, or but you are white and you are male, you have much more chances of success than you would if you were disabled and from that kind of background.
Right.
So there's so much more work. We can't just focus on one of these issues at a time.
Sure.
It's much more complex and nuanced than that. And I think that was the idea behind the acquisition strategy. Actually, it was, how can we build the capability to be able to address these issues holistically? And that's the thing that drives me. That's the thing I'm really passionate about, is, okay, how do we remove barriers for individuals in a really holistic way? And that's what's next for us. Is, we spent a lot of time putting the foundations in place to make sure that we have the capabilities. We're now bringing those together, and there's so much more work we can do by bringing even more specialisms, deep specialisms within the group.
I think that's a really awesome sort of overarching purpose, or overarching sort of mission, if you will, which I respect and I'm very enthused by, likewise. For you as an individual, what is it that is sort of inspiring you to make change, to bring about a more respectful, more considered outlook when it comes to diversity and inclusivity? What is it that has, over time, encouraged you to have that mission, which you have just set out very passionately?
Well, I think I've always known that inequalities exist from the upbringing that I had, I guess.
I think coming from the school and the background.
Yeah, coming from a working class family. My mother was a single parent for a while. I was on free school meals for a while. So all of that, the inequalities that exist within, and my journey's been hard, but it would have been 10 times harder if I'd been black or female. So I recognise how challenging it's been actually to build a career, and I also recognise the opportunities that my children have had that I didn't have, and again that doesn't seem fair. And obviously, I've got a little girl now. I want to make sure that the world is a fairer place, and I encourage them to use their privileges to do the same thing.
Sure, no, that makes total sense. And obviously you've mentioned Lily and your two boys. Throughout the last few years, clearly, because you've been so focused on the business, presumably, you've had to really manage your time with your children. Mm-hmm. How have you found that fine line? Because of course we'd all love to spend 24/7 with our families. So how have you managed to find the fine line that works for you?
I haven't, if I'm honest. So it's been really, really challenging. And I think, if you're scaling a business this quickly, some things will be impacted. So it's been tough. But to be fair, it's been tough throughout my whole career, and I think anyone who probably sits in this chair will tell you the same thing. I don't think my experience is unique. I think it's back to the start of the conversation, isn't it? Sacrifice, compromise, whatever you want to call it. I don't think anybody ever gets the balance right, and sometimes it'll go more one way, and then other times it'll go more the other. And over time, you've got to balance it out, I think. But I don't think anybody ever gets that balance right. I certainly never have.
I think, as you say, it's a continual challenge, isn't it? And as long as you're mindful of it, you'd like to think you're at least being respectful of everyone that's around you. That's important, family, colleagues, friends included. If we're sort of sat 5 years from now, looking back over the 5 years that are to follow, how will you then define how successful the next 5 years have been for you? What measures have you laid out for yourself to define, quantify success?
Sure.
If at
So
all?
yeah, no, we've I have done some of that. So we had an all hands recently, and
I'm sorry, just to add one part of my question. I don't mean from a business perspective. I mean for you, sort of Michael Hall as a CEO, as a business person. You know, how will you establish and effectively ascertain whether you have achieved the success that you want to achieve for you outside of the business?
Don't know if this is going to answer your question, but
No, please shoot. Shoot.
I'll give you my answer, and then you can tell me if I have or I haven't. So we had an all hands recently where we were just mapping out how far we'd come over the last couple of years, and we provide services that impact around about 45,000 people on an annual basis,
Wow.
which is enough to fill a stadium of light broadly. And we've thought, right, how do we, so that's a way of us quantifying actually the impact of our work. What we've set out is how do we get from the Stadium of Light to Glastonbury, which is roughly 4 times the size.
So glad you didn't say St James's Park.
No.
Otherwise, this would have been a very short podcast.
No, we're going to miss St James's Park.
Thank you.
So that's how we've just to visualize it for everyone. It's like this is how we want to scale the group. So we now want to be impacting enough people to fill Glastonbury on an annual basis. So that's 4 times the scale of impact.
Which is an awesome
that we
overarching target, right?
That's how I'll know if I've succeeded. Have we? And that's, you know,
how if you achieve that as a business, how does that help you achieve personal success and contentment?
Yeah, well, I think, look, we've acquired businesses of a certain size and scale. In the belief that we can scale the impact of those businesses, that they wouldn't have been able to achieve independently. So it's my job to make sure that happens. And if we don't achieve that, then I will have failed.
Inspirational is all I'm going to say in response to that. Thank you. And yes, I think to talk about the number of people that EQS helps per annum has, the number of people that can fill out the Stadium of Light is a really great way to actually visualize the way in which you're impacting lives. So that I think is something that definitely I've not been able to previously visualize. So that was a really interesting insight. With one eye on time, Michael, because there's so much more we could discuss, and perhaps we'll get you back for a future podcast so we can. But for now, there's only 2 questions that are still with me, unanswered. So the first question is, if you were to now be able to sit down with the Michael Hall, who was just finishing his first year degree at Sunderland University, and you could give him one bit of advice, but only one piece of advice, what would that be?
Don't be afraid to surround yourself with, don't be afraid to seek out people who are 10 steps ahead of you. As soon as you can, make those connections. I wish I'd done it sooner.
And my last question is one of legacy, because you've talked a lot about, you know, how your business impacts others, which of course is really inspiring. Just talk to me about what legacy you're trying to create, not just necessarily within the EQS business, but actually as an individual, whether it be as a father, a husband, a CEO, a friend. You know, what legacy will you leave?
I think it's about, in terms of legacy, I think it's about, you know, yes, you want to be successful, but have you been successful in the right way? And as you say, for your kids to look and say, okay, my dad did this. I think we've got a lot of work to do here in the Northeast. I want to bring about a lot of change. We're nowhere near, you know, the London and the in the bigger cities. So we've got a lot more work to do around inclusion. So I really want to leave that behind as part of my legacy, that we've actually been able to make significant progress in the North East in terms of our understanding of inclusion. So that's definitely one thing. And yeah, just look if we can fill Glastonbury, I'll look back and I'll go, yeah, we did all right.
Michael, it's been a real pleasure. Massive thanks for joining this podcast today.
Thanks, Carl. Thanks for having me.
It's been a real pleasure spending some time today with Michael Hall, CEO of EQS Group. It's been fascinating to understand more about Michael's career and how he has gone from being CFO to CEO, along with the sacrifices, along with the learnings and the significant obstacles he's had to overcome to become CEO of the EQS Group. I've also found it really insightful to understand what drives Michael as a CEO, and of course the overall vision he has for the business, which is fundamentally to improve equality, inclusivity and diversity across the North East and further afield, which from my perspective is an incredibly humbling and also very inspirational mission to have as an individual and a business. If you would like to watch the full podcast, then for sure please do look at our LinkedIn. Indeed, similarly at our YouTube. For future Confessions of a CEO podcasts, likewise, please do look at LinkedIn, YouTube, and indeed all other social media outlets. But for now, my name is Carl Swansbury. You've been watching Confessions of a CEO, powered by RG, and we look forward to seeing you again soon on a future podcast.